Hello and welcome to Stories That Shape Us. My name is Joanna Daniel. Yesterday I did a video on, not on the Stories That Shape Us podcast, but just on our Wounds to Scars YouTube channel around sexual abuse and some research that I read. And I just wanted to carry on that conversation a little bit here in the podcast. So today I'm talking about three key areas sexual abuse affect that we don't talk about. And I perhaps will do some more around sexual abuse on the podcast because it's such a taboo subject that we don't talk about much. And I believe that with so many women and men experiencing sexual abuse, we really need to have the conversation some more and talk about some of the areas that sexual abuse affect, that is key areas in our lives that needs to be talked about, addressed, and we need to know so that we can process and we can heal. And we can heal and we can move on. We can move forward. Not move forward forgetting about the abuse. We won't, but we'll be able to manage and function in life in a much more efficient way. And sometimes, even when we know that the sexual trauma happens and we've not processed, we've not healed, we've not specifically done work on healing around that in counseling, it's still affecting our lives. And because we're not tapping into processing and unpacking and working through that episode, sometimes we're so afraid of it or ashamed because of it, and because society shames us as women especially for experiencing sexual abuse, because we're shamed by society, we also internalize that shame. And so, those are some of the reasons why many people struggle and never process. Lots of people don't know that the things that they're coping with right now, the challenges that they're having right now in their lives, is as a result of the sexual abuse. Sometimes the things that happen, that is sexual trauma, is trivialized, because if it's not a certain kind of way, then we don't think that this is traumatizing sexually. If somebody's watching you as you shower, if somebody is watching you as you dress, if somebody touches you in inappropriate ways, even if you were 5 and it was one time, that has an effect. And we're not trying to blow things out of proportion here or maximize something that doesn't need it, but it really is important to understand it, to process it, to move on from it. We know that it's a problem when we're trying not to think about it and we're trying to push it in the background and keep it in the background while we try to carry on with life. And if you have to work at keeping it in the background, is a really good indicator that there's something there to process and to work through. So what are some of these areas that sexual abuse impact? So our physical health. Sexual abuse impacts our physical health. It's not just a psychological issue that happens. It's not just something that if you can push it to the background in your thoughts when it comes up, when you're triggered, then you're going to be okay, because there are physical implications. So this sometimes depends on the severity of the trauma and how long the trauma happens, and sometimes the support that you get as a result of the trauma. So all of these things can add together. And as I said earlier, sometimes we minimize some of the ways exposure to sex trauma happens. Exposure to sex happen in ways that were not normal, in ways that was not age appropriate, and the things that we minimize. And so when we're trying to forget and to push it to the background, we're literally repressing those feelings. And because of that, it's the repressing of trauma sometimes that causes the physical impact, because it's kind of stacking it in. We're pushing it down and pressing it down, and there's physical implications. Our nervous system becomes overloaded, and we know that affects everything in our bodies. And so that's why it's really important to have a safe space to go talk about sexual trauma in. That's why I do groups around sexual trauma, because I believe that when we come together in one space, we all experience the same thing and we're working for one common goal. Then I think it's beautiful. And the group and the women that attends that group get really good results, and we're thankful for that. And number 2 is finances. sexual trauma, there's an impact around our finances on sexual trauma. So once again, it's an area that we don't talk about because sometimes we don't see it, we don't see the connection between the trauma when the memories come, dealing with a nightmare, the depression and anxiety that sometimes is as a result of the experiences that we've had, and how that impacts our ability to work. It really does. It can be crippling, those nightmares that we have them at night. Sometimes in the daytime we're triggered, and it impacts our ability to work. And what impacts our ability to work mean that we can't earn and we're not going to live the lives that we want. We can't function at work in the capacities that we want to function. So we get looked over for promotion. Sexual trauma, sometimes people who experience childhood trauma are twice more likely to have anxiety and depression. And if that's the trauma that happened, the anxiety and depression is a direct connection to, which sometimes is so debilitating. Sometimes we can't work, we can't study, we can't function in the ways that we desire and thought we would at certain times in our lives. So it really does affect our finances in a range of different ways. Ability to sometimes save or to manage money because of the energy that it takes to deal with the other areas that sexual trauma impacts. So if you're struggling in this area and you've never made the connections, if you do now, then now is the time to start processing so you can take control of that area of your life. And the last area I want to look at in this video, of course, it's not just 3 ways that it affects us. It affects us in many, many different ways. Socially, sexual abuse affects us socially. So of course, the length of time that the abuse occur and the regularity, sometimes this is where the social impact comes on. So if the trauma happens early in life and it was continuous and you had to learn how to keep it in, what happens in this family stays in it, and you're holding this massive secret and you're too young, then it's a struggle to talk to anyone because you're afraid that if you talk about this thing, it's going to come out, and you were threatened, and so you're not talking. And so then you grow up with this introversion that perhaps is not just a natural part of your personality, but because you were trained to not talk, then you're holding this thing because you're afraid that if you talk, you're going to share it. And of course it works in the reverse as well. You may have shared and you're shut down and told that you're lying, and so that close you in again as well. Or you might come to the place where you are oversharing. And by oversharing, I mean you're telling your story to people who haven't earned the right to hear it. And you're telling your story in settings that can't hold your story, with people that haven't done their own work, look at their own wounds, and so they can't be a good witness to hear your story. And so you tell your story in those settings and you're shamed because of it. But it doesn't stop you, because now it's almost like an automatic thing. So you're casting your pearls before swines, I'm going to call it, because your story is so precious and important, and you're telling it in these places with people who haven't witnessed their own or is empathetic to themselves, and so they can't hear yours. And so those things can sometimes affect us socially, because now we're overthinking, who do I talk to? Can I trust these people? It's a big area that is impacted through sexual trauma, is trust. Can I trust these people? Is it safe to talk here? Can I stay in this room? And so before you know it, you're becoming socially awkward when you probably wouldn't have been had it not been for the trauma, or you were before, and this big event happened in your life in your early teens, or early life in your 20s, or whatever age, and it completely changed your personality. Just know that these are normal, I'm going to say, areas, normal ways to process it. It's a flower where you begin to open up and learn more about yourself, understand yourself some more, and now know the areas and the people that you'd like to live in, allow in your life, and you gain more control over your life. If you've experienced sexual trauma, it's really important that you find somebody who can walk with you on the journey of healing, so that you can find relief, release, and peace. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Stories That Shape Us. I hope you'll join me on the next story.